Recently, there's been a sort of meta-narrative surrounding FNaF theory crafting. What worked back then doesn't seem to work now, and a lot of theorists are left scratching their heads as to why. To be fair, that's a hard question to answer, with many answers. What it's led to has been sort of a re-evaluation of previous FNaF lore. Lots of theorists are tackling older games or books in the series to try and make sense of the previous story in hopes that it leads us to a better understanding of the current one. It's definitely fruitless if you ask me, but it couldn't exactly hurt to clear the air on some previous misconceptions. The one I'm focusing on this time around? A Nightguard who by all accounts shouldn't exist, but by now has been widely accepted by the FNaF community. A Nightguard who is mentioned by name one time throughout the series, and whose ultimate fate remains unknown. I'm talking about a Nightguard from FNaF 2, Fritz Smith. But before we can talk about why Fritz Smith shouldn't exist, we need to cover the game he appears in, my favorite game in the FNaF series, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. One of the most undervalued elements of FNaF 2 is its story, not just in how it expands the lore, but in the actual night-to-night story told by the phone guy. First off, I'm still of the belief that only one person ever died at the FNaF 2 location, that being Cassidy, the vengeful spirit. If you want to know more about why I think this, be sure to check out this video in the top right of the screen. But regardless of whether or not I'm right about that, one thing is certain. Someone definitely dies either before FNaF 2 begins or during FNaF 2's story, and it causes a lot of trouble. Something people rarely talk about in regards to FNaF 2's location is just how detrimental the whole venture was to Fazbear Entertainment. Think about it. They had to previously close 2 locations, most likely due to individual tragedies involving their animatronics and children. Now they've pooled all their money into this new establishment with bigger and better security than ever before, only for the restaurant itself to barely stay open for a few weeks before yet another tragedy. The loss of life is one side of the story, but I think this other aspect might be what really starts the moral downfall of Fazbear Entertainment. Clearly they were all about safety and being careful here, but after this game, that's when they start to get a bit lax on their security measures. They just don't have enough money to give a damn anymore. Anyway, let's move on. FNaF 2 starts out as you'd pretty much expect, with the phone guy calling and welcoming the player to their new summer job at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Except it's not a summer job, but hey, details, am I right? One thing worth noting is that phone guy distinctly calls out that this is our first week on the job. However, phone guy does mention that we may have heard some rumors surrounding the company, and that the old place had been closed for quite a while, so it can be assumed that our character, whoever they may be at this point, may be familiar with the negative reputation of the former Freddys. It's also worth noting that the former Freddys had a negative reputation in the first place. And then Phone Guy says something I rarely see people pick up on, that being when he describes the toys, he says,
"They've spent a small fortune on these new animatronics. Facial recognition, advanced mobility, they even let them walk around during the day." Isn't that neat?
This implies that the toys were the first and only animatronics who were allowed to walk around during the day. Fuel for a future theory? Maybe. Anyway, Night 1 is pretty much what you'd expect from a FNaF phone call. There is one other small thing we need to keep track of, that being that Phone Guy says that there was a previous night guard who complained about conditions and was thus moved to the day shift. Who is this guard? Well, we might find out later. Night 2 is mostly more of explaining mechanics, none of them pertaining to who we're playing as or any of the other employees, which is what we're looking for. Night 3, however, is the real beginning of the story. Phone Guy mentions that we might have heard some rumors recently, with a line that pretty much has always bugged me.
"I can personally assure you that whatever is going on out there, however tragic it may be, has nothing to do with our establishment. It's just all rumor and speculation, people trying to make a buck, you know."
The thing is, if this is a missing children's incident, Phone Guy would never be able to deny it. In my opinion, this sounds more like someone was killed outside but near Freddy's location. Recent enough that we would have heard about it after Night 1, but before the beginning of Night 3. My first thought is, maybe this is the puppet. But that doesn't line up with Henry's speech describing Afton's killings,
"A wound first inflicted on me."
So, floor is still open on that little piece of information. However, this is the beginning of the plotline where we see the fall of this new Freddy's. As I previously stated, I believe that Cassidy, who would become our vengeful spirit, was killed at the FNaF 2 location and stuffed inside Golden Freddy there. This explains why Golden Freddy cannot spawn until Night 6, which is also when Afton's true crime is discovered. Night 4 is when things really start to shift for Freddy's and for Phone Guy. He specifies that the restaurant may have to close for a couple days to comply with an investigation, while also denying any wrongdoing. It definitely seems that the pendulum has shifted from Phone Guy being able to fully deny it and making it sound like the tragedy happened elsewhere, to it now tying directly into this Freddy's establishment. This is also the night when Phone Guy emphasizes avoiding eye contact with the animatronics. He believes that someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems, allowing a known criminal into the restaurant. What's most telling is that Phone Guy says the animatronics act aggressive towards staff, but interact with children just fine. As I said previously, I believe this is because by now the Wizards have been stuffed with the dead kids, and since the toys are constructed with parts salvaged from the Wizards, they become possessed by those same spirits. For example, Susie would be in control of both Withered Chica and Toy Chica, since she was presumably made using parts from Withered Chica. Anyway, moving on. Night 5 is the most telling phone call yet, with Phone Guy saying the building is on lockdown, no one is allowed in or out, especially concerning previous employees. It's clear by now that Phone Guy at the very least suspects a previous employee to have done something tragic in this restaurant. Who is this previous employee? Well, Phone Guy goes on to say that your character will be moved over to the day shift because a position just became available. But then, he also stated that the previous night guard was moved to the day shift before. What happened? It sounds like they were either fired or quit due to the investigation going on. Also important is that Phone Guy says that they don't have a replacement for your shift yet, and that they'll be trying to contact the original restaurant owners, someone from Fredbear's family diner. What's important about this to me is that they're going to Fredbear specifically to try and track down a replacement night guard, so put a pin in that for later. Night 6 is the last phone call of the game, and this one, Phone Guy sounds scared, calling to ask you what you're even doing there at the restaurant. Apparently, they made some kind of new discovery. There was a spare suit in the back, a yellow one, and someone used it. Now none of the animatronics are acting right. However, something odd is that it seems like the investigation has not closed the restaurant fully yet as was presumed. In fact, it sounds more like Phone Guy himself discovered that the yellow suit had been used, not police. The reason I say this is because they still have one more event scheduled for the next day, a birthday party, one that your character will be working the day shift of. The final important piece is that Phone Guy says when they reopen again, he'll be taking the night shift himself. You get 2 paychecks, one for nights 1 through 5 and one for night 6, revealing the player's name to be Jeremy Fitzgerald. And that's all she wrote. Over the course of 6 nights, a tragedy occurs in which the leading suspect is the co-worker you never met, the day guard. By the end of it, the restaurant is forced to close, with the Phone Guy saying he'd take over your position himself, while emphasizing that no one should be in the restaurant at night until then. So then why on earth is Fritz Smith there? Fritz Smith sticks out a lot. He's the only night guard we know of who we technically only play as for one night, that being night 7. If numbers mean anything, and being fair, this is FNaF 2 we're talking about, then it would be implied night 7 immediately followed night 6, the night that Phone Guy tells us straight up, we shouldn't be there, nobody should be there, it's closed down. You could maybe say that Fritz broke in, but when looking at his pink slip, no, he was absolutely hired to be there, and apparently was fired after his first day on the job. On top of that, we know that he didn't work there before Jeremy or the day guard, as he's listed as number 3, meaning the third person to be in that office. So my mind immediately went to one person and one person only, Phone Guy. Is it possible that Fritz Smith is the name of Phone Guy, the character who said he'd take over the position after Jeremy? Well, technically it's possible, but it would require that the Phone Guy in FNaF 1 be a different character than the one in FNaF 2, something that just doesn't seem right. After all, Phone Guy in FNaF 1 makes it clear by that point he's an experienced night guard, something that he'd become immediately after the events of FNaF 2, as we're meant to believe. There's also the issue of Phone Guy saying he'd take over once the restaurant reopened. It doesn't seem like it reopened at all, as the investigation is what leads to it shutting down for good. Oh, and also, the newspaper saying it's shut down for good comes before Night 7, which is Fritz's night. This is why I was saying Fritz Smith should not canonically exist. He's working on a night which, by all accounts, should not be taking place. So then, who is he, or who could he be? Well, let's consider what I find to be the most popular theory, that being that Michael Afton is Fritz Smith. This is one I have a huge problem with, mostly because it's almost completely unsubstantiated. If anything, Michael fits better as Jeremy due to the theory that Michael is following where his father, the killer, goes. It makes more sense for him to apply for the night shift looking for his father, and then find out that his father worked days and be moved to the day himself. But even then, that doesn't make much sense considering William left by night 5 and Jeremy still worked night 6. The only reason he'd do that, in my opinion, is if he didn't have any sort of personal connection that would drag him away from his job. That said, Fritz and Michael are fired for almost identical reasons, those being tampering with the animatronics and odor. There could be something there, but then you have to explain how he gets hired somewhere that's already closed. Personally speaking, I don't believe Michael is Jeremy or Fritz. I believe they're 3 separate and distinct characters. I also previously believed that William could have been Jeremy, but that seems less likely to me now. Could he be Fritz then? Well, maybe, but it would require our pink slip we get after night 7 to be a bit misleading, as this would mean he got fired during the day shift and was the 3rd day guard. I think this lines up a bit more, and it would also mean he's capable of actually being there on night 7, maybe he broke in for some reason. I still don't believe that's the case, but the fact William is the only character so far who I feel like could be Fritz makes this such a headache. The only way we can really figure out who Fritz is now is by seeing if he appears in any other FNaF media. No, he doesn't. At least nowhere confirmed. There are a couple characters that Fritz could be though, and the first one that stoked my interest was Phone Dude. Why Phone Dude? Well, let's take a look at what Phone Dude is like. Phone Dude is only present for the first 2 nights of FNaF 3, and seems well acquainted with what a Freddy's restaurant is like. He gets excited at the premise of finding an animatronic or animatronic parts and wants the place to feel as authentically 80s as possible, using real equipment when possible. So then perhaps this character worked at a Freddy's before? We don't have any reason to believe this aside from one line. The line is,
"First of all, we found some vintage audio training cassettes. Dude, these are like prehistoric. I think they were like training tapes for like other employees or something like that."
Did you catch it? He says, I think they were for other employees. Other employees implies he is an employee himself who had never heard the tapes before. Otherwise, he would have just said, employees. I think the implication here is that Phone Dude is some kind of superfan who used to work for Freddy's and is now helping reconstruct Fazbear Frights to be as authentic to what it was like when he was working there. And what do we prominently see in Fazbear's Frights? A bunch of FNaF 2 imagery. The dismantled toy parts, the paper pals, even the phantoms are all FNaF 2 characters with the exception of Chica. As far as I'm concerned, Phone Dude might be our best bet for Fritz Smith. He's unprofessional, has a hyperfixation on making Fazbear Frights as authentic to the actual restaurants as possible, and was able to retrieve and keep the toy animatronic parts relatively clean. But then, if this is really Fritz, we need to explain how he could even work the night shift on night 7. Well, I think I figured that one out as well. The birthday party. As Phone Guy says on night 6, they have one more event scheduled, and it's for the following day. A birthday party. Maybe Fritz was a new employee and his first day would also be his last, just not because the building was closing down, but because of what he did. When the party was over and everyone left, he didn't. He had heard the rumors and stories and wanted to see for himself, so he tampered with the animatronics during the day and sat defending himself against them at night. When management found out, they fired him, with him snagging the toy animatronic parts on his way out since they had been scrapped. Keeping them for himself, he'd collect loads more memorabilia over the years, eventually opening Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction he could make as authentic as possible with his insider knowledge. Having worked in one of the restaurants all those years ago, he could confirm if something was real or not, and his fascination with the animatronics that he went up against never diminished. This is Fritz Smith, the man under the mask and badge, and the man on the other end of the phone. And there you have it. My explanation for one of FNAF's most overlooked mysteries. Do I think Fritz Smith is actually Phone Dude? Well, in my opinion, it's the best explanation. After all, Night 7 is the only night without a phone call, which tells me that Fritz probably wasn't supposed to be there. Ergo, why I think he was actually hired for the day shift and stuck around for the night shift. There's also Phone Dude knowing a lot more than he theoretically should for an outsider, as well as implying he may have been an employee at one point of the company's history. With him also happening to have the toy animatronics parts stored away, something that presumably only someone who worked at the FNAF 2 location could have. Phone Dude could also feasibly be Jeremy, but it seems more likely that Jeremy didn't want to stick around on the night shift, as opposed to Fritz, who, like I said, would have stayed there intentionally, without pay at that, given we never see a paycheck for Fritz, just a pink slip. It just lines up better than most of our other options if you ask me. And it also explains why we never hear from the name Fritz Smith again. In the grand scheme, He's an unimportant character, just a superfan and collector who tried his hand at opening a haunted house and failed spectacularly. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this theory. I'm DMuted, be sure to subscribe, and peace.